My Lords, I rise to offer the Green Group's support to all of the amendments in this group, which have given us the opportunity to have, I think, what's a very important debate at this stage in our discussions, to really talk about what we're trying to save and what we're trying to protect and what we're trying to improve. Addressing, first of all, Amendment 110 in the name of the Noble Earl of Caithness, also the Noble Earl of Earl Shrewsbury, my noble friend, and myself, that soil should be regarded as a habitat. And I will treat this also with Amendment 112 in the name of the noble Lord Randall of Uxbridge. And I think I'd agree with the noble Lord Curry of Kirkdale that it perhaps doesn't matter so much where the word soil appears, it needs to appear somewhere around here. In fact, I would suggest that we could find a very simple solution which the department could implement very easily, which is just go through the bill and look everywhere where water and air appears and add soil. And I doubt there'd be many problems when you went through looking at the result of that. Because we are, of course, revisiting the debate we had on day one of this committee, which now feels like quite a long time ago, which was about Clause 1, where there was an amendment in my name saying adding soil as an important target. And that's, it needs to be in all of these places, I really do believe. Now, I hope the noble lady Baroness Boycott will forgive me. I'm going to preempt a little perhaps what she's going to say, but it's so important I think it needs to be highlighted. And I note that I saw that she was speaking to the Secretary of State at Groundswell, and during that discussion it was said that soil health was perhaps the most important thing and would be the focus of the Sustainable Farming Initiative. Perhaps the noble lady can tell us more about that. It would be very interesting. But the government is itself identifying soil as such a huge priority. And as the noble Earl of Caithness said, and many others have said, what we're talking about here is how the Agriculture Act and the Environment Act fit together. The Agriculture Act is providing directions on the methods of action. This is judging how successful it's been. Now, I've circulated to a number of noble lords, and I realise now I've neglected to circulate this to the Minister, for which I apologise and I will fix shortly, a briefing paper that I received from a number of farmers, academics and advisors, farm advisors, talking about the difficulty of being paid for results in terms of managing soil health. And it makes an argument for payment for practice instead, with the three key things being identified as minimise soil disturbance, maximise soil cover and maximise diversity of cover. Now, all of those things are clearly very good things to be working towards, but what we need to do is measure how the results come out, and that's what has to be in this bill. Now, I note following the coverage from Groundswell, there was a lot of discussion and excitement about work done on worms. And there is perhaps an argument for saying that you could actually, a rather good measure would actually be see the number of worms per square metre might actually be a very good measure. However, I'm not putting that forward entirely as a serious proposal, although it's certainly something to look at. What I would point the noble Lord the Minister to is a publication last week of a volume titled Advances in Measuring Soil Health, edited by Professor Wilfred Otten from Cranfield University, a real sign of the measures in which how much this field is moving forward, which brings me back to our discussion from Clause 1. And in that, the noble Lord the Minister, in arguing against why soil shouldn't be included in Clause 1, said that the government is working collaboratively with technical experts to identify appropriate soil metrics. And this is a complicated business, and that they're looking to develop a healthy soil indicator as part of the 25-year environmental plan. I would say that this is a matter of extreme urgency focus as identified by the Secretary of State. This is not something that can wait for something off into the far distance. There's a great deal of new work available now, a great deal of ideas available now, and maybe the first metric we end up with is not perfect, but we need a metric. And if that needs to be improved in future, so be it. That's something that can be dealt with by regulation, as the government so likes to tell us. So moving on from the issue of soil, just to address briefly some other amendments in this group, particularly Amendment 113 in the name of the noble Baroness Lady Mackintosh of Pickering, also signed by the noble Lord Teverson, my noble friend and myself. Again, we're coming back to some of the debate that we had in Clause 1 of the bill, and we're talking about including the marine environment. And I just want to take one apparently small, but I think very illustrative case study. And for this I thank Dr. Alexander Lees at Manchester Metropolitan University for drawing this to my attention. And it's simply a photo, a very, very sad photo of a bundle of sodden feathers. This was a black-browed albatross. You can see in the photo coming from its mouth a ribbon that illustrates it almost certainly died from ingesting a balloon. This is a magnificent creature that could have lived for 7 decades. 7 decades of life of freedom. And it's cut short for a balloon. Now, my lords, the noble lord and I have engaged in some debate, and I'm sure we will in the coming groups, about extended producer responsibility and plastics. Now, I would question how any form of extended producer responsibility would cover the cost of that albatross and its loss of life. Now, and the reason why I think it's so important we include marine here is because it's really important to stress there is no such thing as away. We cannot throw things away. And very often we've regarded the marine environment as the space that we throw away. And if we don't include that, we're really not going to be taking proper account of the impacts of our actions. So I come finally to two more small but important elements here. First of all, I have to commend the noble Earl of Caithness for some very nimble drafting for Amendment 113B. And this again goes back to the debates we had in Clause 1 and indeed an amendment that I put down then about the state of nature. And I made a very rough first attempt at trying to define biodiversity here. And I think the noble Earl has really struck on something by working on the Minister's response and coming up with this amendment. And I very much look forward to hearing the Minister's response to his own words. And finally, I come to the group of amendments tabled by the noble Lord Berkeley about adding ecosystems in a number of places. And again, we're really coming back to the definition of biodiversity. And we can protect plants, animals, fungi, the three kingdoms. We can look at these in isolation, but it is the relationship between these that makes up the natural world, the natural environment, and it is terribly important that this bill recognises this. And I'd point to the words of the noble Lord Framlingham, talking about how rare is the wonderful, irreplaceable soils underneath ancient forests, and how little of that we have left. And I think adding ecosystems here really helps draw attention to the utter fallacy of biodiversity offsetting, and the idea is something that I have seen firsthand, the idea that you can just transplant the bits of an ancient forest and shove them into an arable field and assume they're going to get back together somehow or another. And I think adding ecosystems here is a very useful addition to that. Thank you, my lords.